forming the prospective need obligation number for the township, and also just kind of share the components that make that up. And then finally, I'll touch on some of the compliance process, next steps that the township is going to be making, to move towards compliance, and opportunities for additional bonus crediting to, account for this number and satisfy the need. And please feel free to, provide any questions in the Q&A box as I go. I'm going to try and answer them as we go a little bit. If I see something that's really pertinent to what I'm talking about, I don't want to force people to wait. This is a small group. We can, kind of move along here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my slides and my screen. Let's hope this works. Okay, just give me a high sign if you can see. Okay, very good. All right. So as I mentioned, we'll be talking this evening about the fourth round timelines, allocations, and then the planning next steps. Okay. So I'm going to get right into the timeline to really kind of talk concretely about, what steps the township needs to effectuate and what this process is going to look like as we move into 2025. Here we are at the end of 2024. A lot has happened in recent months on the legislation. But really this is now where action starts to be taken for municipalities to move into the compliance phase and start to follow the letter of the new law. So the first deadline that is coming up is January 31st of 2025. That is the deadline for the township's governing body to adopt a resolution containing what the obligation number for the prospective need allocation will be. The following adoption of the number by resolution, the municipality must transmit that to DCA, to the administrative entity there. And so then that number is recorded and kind of filed and cataloged with DCA that the township has taken their action and filed it. And then there is a 1-month period through February 28th where any interested party may file an objection or a challenge to the obligation number that the municipality has adopted. So these challenges then are submitted within that 1-month period to the Affordable Housing Dispute Resolution Program. It's a new program that's being stood up. It's technically with the administrator of the courts. It's kind of an interesting way that they've nested this in the legislation. And so challenges can be filed essentially through the administrator of the court, and then there is a review process of the challenge. And that review period is essentially from March 1st through the end of March 31st. So the end of March is the deadline for the Affordable Housing Dispute Resolution Program to issue their final decision on the obligation number, whether they affirm the municipality's adopted number, or if they propose an amendment to the municipality's adopted number, or they could outright reject it and default to the DCA number. So what's really, really important for planning purposes is that we could end the month of December here on the Millburn side of the table with saying, this is our number. We're going to move forward into a planning process with this number. If there is a challenge, then a subsequent adjudication of the decision of what the number is. We may not have affirmation of what the number will be until April. So it's really, really important for us to be dynamic on the township side, ready to kind of, see what the number is and be prepared to respond to any inquiries or challenges, and also just be cognizant that the number may change. From there, it's also important because the timeline is going to get very, very fast because the new housing element and fair share plan, which will be the 10-year document that will plan the implementation of the prospective need allocation accommodation for the period between 2025 and 2035, that new plan document needs to be adopted by the Township Planning Board and endorsed by the governing body all by June 30th. And if we think about June, it's typically a 1 meeting per month planning board meeting schedule. The governing body, summer vacations are starting. So the window of time to act in that period gets a little bit tight. There's also a requirement that any housing element and fair share plan be posted for public inspection 20 days prior to any action being taken at the planning board. So we really, really are going to need to have a housing element and fair share plan complete, a draft done for public inspection, I would say by mid-May at the latest. So if you string together these dates, April 1st, you could get your number. And then mid-May, you have to have a plan available for public inspection. We really are not going to have much time if we wait until that point. So that's why it's really, really important. And it's great that we have this group and and the township is being proactive to start to facilitate this conversation and advance steps to address, identify strategies to address the prospective need obligation. Moving beyond the June 30th deadline to adopt the Housing Element and Fair Share Plan, there is a deadline then for another challenge period, whereby any interested party can entertain a challenge to the proposed mechanism that the township has identified to satisfy the prospective need. They could challenge a zoning designation or challenge that a property may not, be able to be developed in that capacity to support accommodating the number of units, perhaps. Other challenges, could be identified in this process. So interested parties now have a second challenge period to essentially the implementing mechanisms that the township identifies to comply with the prospective need obligation satisfaction.
Real quick, because I think it would be
Yes.
a benefit to everyone. How do they define who can be an intervener / objector? Do you need to, own land that you want to develop, or can you be, just a random developer that says, I want to at some point in the next 10 years build something in Milburn, and so I think their number is not appropriate. And then how can organizations like Fair Share also intervene?
It's a great question. The legislation does contain the words interested party. So, really someone does need to have some level of standing within the process. What that will be and how that is clearly defined is still a little bit subject to interpretation, as the Affordable Housing Dispute Resolution Program still finalizes their rule process and their rule adoption. We don't yet have those rules at this point. My assumption is that, given the interested party terminology, that someone has to have standing as far as a relationship in a property, or a history of development pattern within the municipality, some kind of grounds upon which they can enter into the case. However, we don't really have clear definition on that at this point just yet. But I hope that we do get that fairly quickly, especially because we're approaching the first challenge period, which will be the pendency of the month of February, for us to hear who may be interested parties that are intervening as far as the number obligation adoption goes. But that would be my initial take, given the use of the terminology of interested party. Yes, Ms. Pasternak?
Yeah, I just have a quick addition or clarification of what you just said. What if there's a citizens group or residents group that forms that wants to object? Is that defined as an intervener or interested party?
Again, this is kind of getting into legal interpretation, but based on my interpretation of a planner, and as far as what an interested party is defined in the municipal land use law, given that these would be residents of the municipality, I would say that they do have standing as an interested party.
Okay, thank you.
It's not an official legal opinion, but just based on how I'm reading these tea leaves, I would say. So,
yeah.
Okay. Any other questions before I? Okay.
Just to clarify on that, though, what we have seen over the past few years is that the courts have not considered the residents to be an interested party, because they seem to claim that the residents are represented by the township. And so when residents have tried to intervene in these matters, they've been denied the ability to do so. And so far, I believe that Fair Share Housing is one of the few non-developer interested parties.
Yeah, my caveat or clarification on that, which is where this kind of changes in the process, is that the third round, was really because it was settled in the courts between, municipal entities and Fair Share, which became an intervening party. I think that's where, there was some kind of protection of that engagement of the settlement, as far as others coming into the process. Now that this is more of a legislative process and, set forth within statute, I don't know how that changes it. Again, I'm not commenting from a legal opinion, but I do think that the dynamics of this process in the fourth round are a little bit different than how it was adjudicated in the third round, just to characterize. Yeah, Mr. Cosgrove?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, just a question on it's actually technically one slide before the one we're on. But the deadline, the March 31st deadline for affordable housing to dispute what goes into that, if you know?
So that's also what we're still kind of waiting for final rules as far as the process that the Affordable Housing Dispute Resolution Program will go through. I did receive earlier today some correspondence from the courts indicating what some of the framework will be. Still kind of going through that to ascertain exactly what that process will look like. But they do have some kind of iterative process where it explains, the numbers come in and, there may be a request for follow-up information from the municipality as far as how they did the methodology calculation or why their number is different. So there will be a little bit of, I believe, an iterative process. And I do recall that I did see that there was some language that they would potentially be a settlement where they would bring together the parties to discuss, why the numbers are different and how they can, come to some sense of agreement. So it may be more of an ingrained process than what was initially thought at the outset, that, the numbers would just go in and we'd get an answer. But I think we'll get more clarity as we go into the new year as to how that process is going to work.
Thank you.
Sure. And I do see, Frank, that there are questions coming in. I can't see them, so if you could just help kind of, if any of those, just because I'm sharing my screen. I just don't want to make sure, I don't miss anything.
So, a resident asked if the township rejects the DCA's October numbers, when does the township not accept the DCA number, or must the township adopt a different number by January 31st?
So yes, the township has to adopt a number by January 31st. The township, it's important, and I'll get into this when I get into the methodology section discussion. The DCA numbers are non-binding. Those are advisory numbers. And, DCA has characterized it as much, that they have prepared these numbers. They did it one time. They did, a statewide land analysis. They did a statewide, income analysis. So they did all these analyses and put it together. And, in presentations that we've heard from DCA, they've admitted that, there may be better, more accurate local data that can supplement or support or, adjust or amend what's been done. So they are open and receptive. At least staff have indicated that they are open and receptive to seeing some of that feedback on things. I think particularly on the developable land piece, I'm a GIS analyst myself. It is very hard to aggregate and crunch spatial data in a statewide format across 21 counties. When you're doing stream buffers, steep slopes, all these things. So, they have admitted that, there may be issues or inconsistencies that need to be corrected. So, I think it's important to note two things. One, the numbers are not compulsory. You're not required to adopt those numbers. And two, I think that there is a willingness, at least to see, what issues there may be as far as how those numbers can be addressed. Now, what cannot fundamentally change is the methodology, which is clearly within the law as far as what you're supposed to count and how the process counts. But I think that's where there may be some discrepancy in the numbers. And municipalities are free to adopt their own number. The DCA number is really just advisory at this point. Okay. All right, keep going. So again, I mentioned there's a second challenge period, which really challenges the implementation mechanisms that are identified in the Housing Element and Fair Share Plan. So that challenge period concludes August 31st of 2025. And then there's a much longer period of time between essentially September 1st through the end of 2025, within which the municipality can work to settle and challenge or to provide explanation related to the requested changes to the plan element or modifications. Essentially, those items that have been challenged, the municipality can prepare a response or discuss. Say there's a property owner that said, well, I can actually develop more than what you've indicated in the plan. They can, kind of negotiate those processes and come to some term of settlement by the end of the year. And then moving into 2026, March 15th of 2026 is the deadline for all municipalities to complete any amendments to the Housing Element and Fair Share Plan as a result of the challenge that was issued. And then also to adopt all of the implementing ordinances, including overlay zones, site-specific zones, whatever else has been identified. Those mechanisms need to be effectuated by March 15th of 2026 in the municipal code. Mr. Cosgrove.
Yeah, quick question on the August 31st deadline for interested parties, and this is teeing off a little Gene and Gene's question, Frank's comment, or Frank's question too. Who do we think the likely interested parties are going to be? Is it going to be Fair Share for sure?
Potentially could be Fair Share Housing Center. Could be a property owner that, is seeking to develop or, effectuate a large development project. If they were not included in the process as a property able to support or accommodate affordable housing development, that could be an interest, a party that would,
Gotcha.
come forward and, say that they have property and that property was not included, for example. But, I think really it's kind of those types of things on the implementation phase.
Thanks.
Sure. Okay, so that's kind of the broad process that we have set forth over the next year as far as how we need to move forward. So the most immediate thing, which I'm going to kind of shift into now, is thinking about the number and how we need to, how we're thinking about the number and evaluating what the prospective need obligation number is and how we got to what that number is. And I think that that's important for this group to kind of understand, for everybody to understand how the number is calculated. So as I mentioned, DCA has released their non-binding calculations. They were released, it was not officially October 20th. That was the statutory date. It was actually released slightly before that. They issued their report on the fourth round municipal fair share obligations. They released the complete full methodology document. They also released a report of their methodology that was by an independent peer review, which is very helpful, a complete workbook, and then also the GIS data used to calculate the land capacity factor. In comparison to the third round process, this is much more of an open book, and I'm happy to share that I'm a member of the Housing Committee for the New Jersey Planning Association, and we wrote a letter to DCA asking them to please release all this information, so that it is not an opaque process and that we keep transparency and kind of assure everybody that there is numbers behind this and it's not just some stew being cooked up in some back room. So now we can all see how the numbers work and how this process is done. The complete methodology is available online. I have the link here, but if you just Google the fourth round numbers from DCA, they have an entire dedicated webpage and all the links to all the materials to download. And again, as I mentioned, municipalities may use the DCA numbers as guidance and prepare updated calculations informed by more accurate local conditions or values or figures. But again, as I note, the calculation methodology is set within law, so you can't deviate and calculate a different way, but you can kind of change some of those data inputs, if you may. Go ahead, Mr. Cosgrove.
Yeah, just a quick question on where is there? Are we able to access the map that they did of our town, indicating what parts of town they're saying are developable versus not?
So they, the DCA published what's known as a GIS REST service, which is just kind of like a layer that you can see on a map that kind of sits on top of it. I have successfully extracted it out of that server and now have a local copy, and I'm going through the process of looking at it with respect to parcels in Millburn to kind of do that confirmation process. So we do have that available. We are going through a process to confirm that these identified developable areas are in fact, or maybe not, developable. And we're going to go through a process and we'll report back to this group, on our findings and let you know.
Okay. Because that might be something the group might want to look at, because there might be, in my mind at least, there might be some citizen input about a particular piece of property that without sounding critical, that we missed.
Yeah.
That somebody knows something about.
Right. And not to, I don't want to, denigrate DCA at all. They did a yeoman's job, really kind of going through and doing this statewide analysis. But, obviously there are going to be deficiencies or errors or omissions that happen through the process. So I can tell you though, and you'll see this in the numbers, that the land capacity factor is the smallest component of Millburn's prospective need obligation allocation calculation. So I believe it was only about 25 acres that have been identified as developable, in line with the developable standards that are set forth within the methodology. So it's really not a big piece, but we're going to go through it and make sure that things are okay. Go ahead, Frank. Did you have a question?
Yeah. So, are you aware of any lawsuits that are currently on the books challenging the methodology the DCA used?
Well, I mean, I think that, in some respects, the current Montville case, which I believe now 30 municipalities have enjoined, is essentially challenging some components of the methodology. I think that the land piece is not paramount or critical in that piece. And I think that DCA's comments and statements that they've made, in public, at the session that they held at the League of Municipalities, for example, indicated that, that there would be opportunities for them to correct that and, address some issues related to that. So I don't anticipate, any arguments or lawsuits or challenges over the land piece specifically, but I do know that, of course, the Montville case is challenging other components of methodology, not necessarily the data inputs, for example.
And just so everyone is aware, Milburn is a party to that lawsuit, and there will be a hearing tomorrow, but I'll provide the link to that after.
That's right. Okay. Okay. So first, kind of the baseline number. So how do we get to the total number of units that are allocated across each of these regions? So first of all, the state is divided into 6 affordable housing regions. Each of the regions is supposed to be anchored by, a more major urban or, key center city type of location. So region 1 consists of Sussex, Passaic, Bergen, and Hudson counties, anchored by Jersey City. Milburn is located within region 2, which consists of Essex, Morris, Union, and Warren counties, of course, anchored by the city of Newark. And so what the baseline number, the calculation of the total prospective need units for the forthcoming period of 2025 to 2035 is calculated by measuring the change in total households between 2010 and 2020, dividing that total change by 2.5, and to estimate the share of that household growth that is for low and moderate income households. And then that number essentially becomes the prospective need to be allocated across the region. So here within region 2, Essex, Morris, Union, Warren counties, as I mentioned, between 2010 and 2020, there was growth of 51,264 new households within the region. When you divide that by 2.5, you result in 20,506 low and moderate income households, and that equals the total prospective need to be allocated across all the municipalities in region 2. Yes, Mr. Bradford? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah. I'm struggling a bit with the arithmetic because the typical formula is 80-20. If you build 100 units, 20 are affordable housing, yet the calculation used in here is 40%.
That's right.
So we would have to build in all other things being equal, we'd have to build twice as much as we need under an 80-20 formulation. Am I reading this correctly?
That is correct. Yes. Yeah, and that's the way that it's been. This is the way that the prospective need number has been calculated in all prior rounds too. So, and this is just the way that it's been set up. And of course, the 80-20, obviously that's an implementation mechanism for the inclusionary mix, typical that we do see.
Right, but it's an implementation mechanism that theoretically works economically for the developer.
That's correct. As far as financial feasibility, yes. Yeah, so it's just important to note that the methodology, as far as calculating the number, is really essentially a 40% figure of the household growth that was experienced in the prior decennial census period. Okay. All right. So moving forward, so 20,000 units are the total number of units to be allocated across all of Region 2. How the units get allocated is the result of an averaging of 3 individual component factors. The first is the income capacity factor. The second is the non-residential valuation change factor. And the third is the land capacity or developable land factor. Those terms can be used interchangeably by a lot of different folks. But I think the DCA is using more so the land capacity factor for their terminology. And I'm going to walk through each of these in detail in just a moment. The allocation factor is used as a percentage. So when you average that out and you get the resulting number, it's considered a percentage. And that's applied to the total obligation, and that results in the number of units. So 20,000 units region-wide times, 2%, that's the number of the share of units for that municipality, for example. So just a couple of things that I wanted to note also on this slide. So Region 2 consists of 104 municipalities in Essex, Morris, Union, and Warren counties, again, that need to absorb that 20,506 units. Within Region 2, there are 13 qualified urban aid municipalities, which are exempt from the prospective need allocation. Due to that exemption status, only 91 municipalities are assigned the prospective need allocation. So really that 20,000 figure is being applied to the 91 municipalities that are not exempt pursuant to the law. Okay, so now, yes, Ms. Pasternak, go ahead. You're on mute still. I don't know if you-
All right, on the exempt municipalities,
Yes,
is Montclair one of those?
yes, Montclair is one. Mhm.
Wow. How did they determine that Montclair should be exempt? Do you know?
So the exemption criteria is pretty detailed in that the first municipality must be an urban aid municipality, which is a policy listing. I'm not exactly sure which state entity does the listing for the urban aid municipalities. It could be DCA. To qualify, it's a listing for urban aid status. However, not all urban aid municipalities automatically qualify. There are some urban aid municipalities that are participating in the prospective media allocation process. From there, there's 3 sub-criteria for urban aid municipalities to meet. One is if they're of a certain size or certain density, they automatically are exempt. So larger municipalities are automatically exempt. If they're have a density between a certain range and then a low share of vacant land, they're largely built out, then they also may be exempt in that place. And then there's, I think, 1/3 criteria about ratio of value of vacant land. There's some sub criteria. So Montclair does meet it on one of the density criteria. I think they're in the middle tier category for being an exempt municipality.
Thank you. I find that amazing. Thanks.
Sure. Okay, so next, the income capacity factor. So this is I'm going to talk through each of the 3 component factors. So this is determined by averaging the municipal share of the regional sum of differences between the median household incomes and the same calculation, but weighted by the number of households of your municipality. If you think about a high income community with a small number of households, it's not going to have a big income capacity factor, but a high income community with a lot of households that will have a higher income capacity factor. So there is a weighting by size of the community to kind of scale that. And the theory is that, the policy theory, I'm not opining my personal theory or anything, but I believe when they were initially developing methodology, the theory was that higher income communities had more capacity to absorb, a balance of lower income households, I guess is the theory that they were thinking of. So for the Milburn's income capacity factor, which I have listed here in the second bullet, the township's income capacity factor is 3.06. This is the highest among all Region 2 municipalities. The non-residential valuation change factor, this is determined by calculating the changes in non-residential property valuations in the municipality since the beginning of the gap period in 1999 through the most recent available tax year data, which is in 2023, was published in February of this year. The new data will not come out until February of 25 for the 2024 year. So we'll just miss it to incorporate into the methodology. So we have all the data now for the 2023 year. So it's the change in the municipality's non-residential valuations divided by the regional total change in non-residential valuations to determine the municipality's share of non-residential valuation growth. And for the purposes of this analysis, the non-residential valuation is all commercial assessments and industrial assessment properties, exclusive of any residential. So mixed-use properties are not counted. This is just for commercial and industrial assessments. And the theory behind this is that this is technically a proxy for employment growth. The theory is that, if you see an increase in valuation of commercial or industrial assets, there must be an increase in employment or number of jobs within that community, and housing should follow jobs. So that's really kind of the theory behind it, how this factor was included into the formula. Yes, Mr. Cosgrove.
Yeah, do you think there's the ability for us to challenge that aspect that, hey, listen, we have non-residential property that's worth X dollars, and they're going to assign an assumption that means so many X jobs. Is there a way for us to challenge that?
It gets a little bit, I would have to explore kind of how we would think about that. As I mentioned, this first bullet point, this is express language from the legislation. So this says exactly like how to do the calculation. So we would have to think about how we could think about characterizing that or addressing that or identifying any nuances to the data change that that we may have experienced in Milburn. It's certainly a question that we could evaluate. But I think on the face, it's a little bit difficult to kind of deviate away too much from the data that is required to be used as set forth within the bill. Yes, Frank.
So we had some questions come in.
Oh, sure.
I don't know if you can see them now. I did make you a co-host, but one of the questions is, are the urban exempt municipalities excluded from these rankings? So how do they factor into the calculations?
Are the urban exempt municipalities excluded from the rankings as far as the highest income question? Is that, I guess?
Well, there wasn't more context than that.
Okay.
I imagine
Yeah.
that,
So right. So essentially, if anybody can go and download the DCA workbook and see the Excel table, all the urban municipalities, the qualified urban exempt municipalities, have 0 values or dash line values. So they are not quantified. As far as having an income capacity or any of these sub factors, they were not calculated for those places. So the rankings that I'm providing here are just for those that have have a number quantified for those participating 91 municipalities.
So we had another question, which is, can you explain the theory behind excluding some cities? There's another person that asked a similar question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I think what's really, really important foundationally in this process is the setup for this entire process was set forth back during the first round, which was done in the 80s, and first and second round, 80s and the early 90s. And I think at that time, our urban places here in New Jersey, and this is, I'm kind of speaking philosophically here. This isn't necessarily, the intent, but as a planner, I'm thinking this is probably what, why this was set up this way, and that, urban communities at that time in the late 80s or early 90s were viewed as places where there wasn't ample opportunity for residents to advance or gain access to quality education or safe communities or other things. And I believe that the theory was that by creating opportunities outside those places, we would see an opportunity for new residents to thrive. I think on the other side of that is some of these urban places at that time were much more, downtrodden and, divested, and, putting the burden of having to, repair their communities and then build new residential units on top of that was just not something that I think that was seen as an appropriate policy solution at that point. So I think that is kind of the root of it. I do think that at this point, obviously the state is in a much different place. Urban places are, we've seen a big renaissance throughout the 2000s of our urban places here in New Jersey and across the country. And I don't know, this is just me wearing my planner policy hat. I don't know if this is really the best policy solution, but this is what, the state has moved forward with and codified within law at this point. So, just kind of advancing what's already been in place. Ms. Pasternak? You're on mute still. I don't know. Oh, okay. Okay. I'll move on to the next one. Just rounding this out. So on the non-residential valuation factor, Milburn's non-residential valuation factor you'll see is 4.6. So this factor is actually higher than the income capacity factor, which was just over 3. And this is the 6th highest in Region 2. There's actually 5 municipalities with a higher non-residential valuation factor than this one.
Sorry, I did figure out how to unmute. My
sorry.
question is that they're looking at real estate values, non-residential. What about all these buildings that are sitting there empty or employees that don't turn up at those buildings but work from home? Is that being considered?
So I just want to make sure we clarify that it's not real estate values. It is tax assessment values. So it's the it's the land improvements, the value improvements, and obviously then the total improvements for that property. So it's not necessarily market based. It's really the tax assessment based. And there is an equalizing factor so that everybody is kind of equalized in that process. But that is a great point, and and we've seen kind of a transition and change in a lot of different dynamics. I can also say that, I did co-author a white paper as part of the housing committee work to talk about this non-residential valuation change issue. And what we saw initially in a lot of communities is the biggest growth is in some of our warehouse communities where, new Amazon warehouses were constructed, which are actually low employment centers. So we do have kind of a mismatch of, using this as a proxy for employment. Is it the best solution? I think that there are ways to improve it, but unfortunately, the legislation did not, amend to how we thought it should be.
Okay.
Frank, did you want to?
Yes, we had another question. The question is, sorry, let me clarify. A few slides earlier, it was mentioned the DCA calculation showed the 3 counties had approximately 50,000 new households, and that would calculate to 20,000 low to medium housing need. Do these numbers include the excluded municipalities? If so, I guess that means the other 91 towns have to cover the needs of the excluded municipalities?
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
And another question, how does the mall affect our non-residential valuation factor? Does that artificially drive that up?
I don't know about artificially, but it certainly is a very large asset that has obviously grown in value over time. So the increase in value of the mall certainly is probably one of the main driving factors, I would say, to this 4.6 factor that we experience here in Millburn. With it being, the 6th highest of the 91 municipalities across Region 2. Okay.
Who's the highest if we're 6th?
You're getting me on the spot. I believe it was somebody with a lot of warehouse development. I think it was, I want to say maybe Linden.
Okay,
It's like
sorry.
10%. They are not an exempt municipality, I know. So, but I can certainly find that out and let you know. Okay. All right, and then moving on to the developable land factor, the land capacity factor. So this is determined by estimating the area of developable land within the municipality's boundaries and regional boundaries, which may accommodate development. So, DCA went through an exercise where they used 2020 satellite imagery and assessed the land use land cover condition, screening for predominantly agricultural and grass and forested or grassland areas, essentially native landscapes, to identify developable land areas. And then removed stream buffers, environmental constrained areas, steep slope areas, other areas that would be encumbered from development. And then the resulting, and they also did screen those against parcels or properties that were, identified as vacant or, under municipal ownership or, local government ownership. That resulting value or number is, informing the amount of developable land within each of the municipalities, then thereby across the region. So we are going to go through a process, as I mentioned earlier, to screen through those properties. It's roughly, I think it's about 24, 25 acres here in Millburn, to confirm, how those, overlay on the map and if they are in fact developable or not. I see, I can see the question now, Frank. So I see Mr. Feld, I see your question. Is the developable land numbers consistent with the DEP proposed rules and regulations? No, the proposed rules have not yet been finalized or adopted. I think at this point, these developable areas are just with respect to the existing regulations and rules in place at this point. And second to that, just wanted to supplement and say that the state plan has also gone through an update process, and the state plan draft has been released and is now going into the cross acceptance phase. There is a weighting factor for the developable land categories. However, that is not on the prospective state plan. That is on the weighting factor now within the analysis that DCA did is based on the 2001 state plan. So we're still kind of using that older version at this point. So I see the next question: how to land uses like golf courses, tennis courts, pools count as developable lands? Those lands do not. The DCA analysis is pretty sophisticated with respect to analyzing the aerial imagery. They have other open lands or other recreational land categories that typically encumber golf courses, tennis courts, those other types of recreational uses. However, I will say that what we've seen in some cases preliminarily in looking at this is you'll see kind of like forested areas along the edge of a golf course, for example, as being identified as developable, but given the shape or configuration, like those acres are not developable. So there will be an opportunity for us to do that screening here in Melbourne to identify those areas. Yes, Frank.
So, we have certain areas of town that flood, or are prone to flooding.
Mhm.
Flood maps have changed over the years. So the CMO zone, for instance, is that included or excluded, or is that something that you have to analyze the GIS data to determine?
So the DCA has indicated that they did use flood information, but again, I just want to note that it is the root base of it is for large swaths of forested and agricultural areas. So we're not seeing a lot within the CMO zone, for example, of those types of things. But the DCA has indicated that they did screen for flood prone areas as well. So we'll have to take a look and see exactly what was resulted from that process. Okay. So and I just wanted to note, so Milburn's land capacity factor, as I mentioned, is the smallest component contributing to the calculation at 0.46, that factor, and that ranks 42nd out of the 91 Region 2 municipalities. Then this slide kind of summarizes the preceding slides around the three different component factors and how we get to kind of the number that DCA has calculated for the township. So as I mentioned, the income capacity factor is 3.06%. The non-residential valuation change factor is 4.6%. The developable land factor is 0.46%, which results in an averaging of these three values to 2.71%. So essentially, thereby, Milburn is responsible for 2.71% of Region 2's 20,506 unit allocation, and that gives us the 555 unit number that DCA has identified as the prospective need obligation for the township. Any other questions about
Yeah,
that?
I'm sorry, what would be if it's 555 using the 80/20, the total number, just, as the example, even if that number goes down, it would be how many total units then? 80% market, 20% affordable.
Yeah, right. Sorry, you're catching me on the spot. I'm like,
No,
got a
I
lot of
can't.
numbers.
We need Jerry.
Divide by 0.2, 2,700 units.
That's how many, based on that number, we would have to build.
That, yeah, if that was all at
80/20.
80/20, of course. So, and I think what's important to note is that this is just the obligation number that is the initial phase. Once we then move into the housing element fair share plan, that's where we will do a vacant land adjustment for the municipality to go through and screen, identify properties that can support this to lessen that number. And then there is also just a requirement as set forth in the legislation that just a share of that resulting number after the vacant land adjustment needs to be satisfied through a realistic development potential or actually, yielded. So, once we move into that process, and I won't get into too many details on that component phase this evening, but that's really where this group, the Citizen Advisory Group, and as we start to move into the housing element adoption drafting process, that's where we're going to have to start to think about those compliance mechanisms and how we can draw down the number to more accurately reflect the conditions on the ground within the township. Okay. Okay.
Just so the audience is clear, that that's a lengthy conversation. The various mechanisms that are available, bonus credits, etc. So we'll do another session in the future on just that particular aspect. It's too much to do in one.
I do have a slide on bonus credits just so people can start to think about those. So, but I only have a couple more things to share, so not too much more. So again, as I mentioned, the DCA report obligations are non-binding. Municipalities may consider these obligations, and again, this needs to be adopted by January 31st of 2025. So really the next steps, and this is kind of alluding to what we just talked about, The next steps following the obligation adoption are really to start moving into the phase of preparing the housing element and fair share plan after adoption of the numbers. So starting to look at that vacant land adjustment opportunity, doing an analysis of the existing housing element and fair share plan, identification of new sites opportunities to accommodate the obligation, what other compliance mechanisms we can identify or talk about, such as overlays, realistic sites for development, and then also expanding crediting opportunities and planning to maximize the credits available under the crediting modifications that are available in the fourth round. And my last slide here talks about some of those new crediting opportunities that the fourth round legislation has. So these are what are called bonus credits. So up to 25% of your prospective need obligation can be satisfied through bonus credits. So not units. You can, take 25% of the 555 number and, essentially double count or 1.5 count units towards these. So special needs housing opportunities essentially count as 2 units. Anything that's municipally sponsored, either through a land donation or a cost share mechanism, can count as 2 units. So, if you develop 75 units municipally sponsored, that really counts as 150 units, potentially 75 additional credits towards that. Market to affordable conversion. So that would be, converting a market rate unit or purchasing a market rate unit, converting it to an affordable. And then of course, 100% affordable housing developments. Other new bonus credits that yield a half credit are partnerships with nonprofits, sites within a half mile of transit that includes bus or train service, senior units up to 10% of available senior units, redevelopment of a commercial site, so office conversion can yield a half bonus credit. Incorporation of additional very low income units or additional above and beyond the minimum required 3-bedroom units, and then also extending affordability controls for units that may be expiring in some municipalities that did second round rent controlled units or deed restricted units. Some of those 30-year terms are coming up on expiration, so now's a nice time to renew those for a new term. And those can count as credits. Yes, Mr. Cosgrove.
Yeah, on the renewal or extension of the affordability controls, what mechanisms are you seeing that are being used by the towns to compel that or to?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I know in some municipalities are leveraging their affordable housing trust funds through kind of a loan program or a funding program to give $10,000 to $15,000 for HVAC upgrades, for bathroom upgrades, kitchen upgrades, and in exchange for the funds to improve the unit, there is a requirement that in order to encumber the funds or avail yourself of the funds, you have to sign on to extend the deed restriction for a new period to keep the unit as an affordable unit, for example. So that's some things that some municipalities are doing.
Do you think on going forward on new projects that happen, we can insist on a 40-year instead of a 30, and then have to pay them money down the road to get them to extend it?
I believe that the new legislation, I think, requires in the fourth round that rental units have a 40-year deed restriction period. So I think that has already been extended by default, that it needs to be that 40-year period.
Thank you.
Sure. I see Mr. Feld's question in the Q&A just regarding backdating or applying backwards credits. There is ability to apply credits to round 3 projects that are coming online. So that is an option to apply credits in those locations. The one thing that it remains true though is that the number of caps or the amount of credits is capped at 25% of the fourth round prospective need obligation. So it's just something that you have to kind of just think about globally. Where do you get your best bang for the buck kind of thing? Do you want to put them on the third round ones, or do you want to try and put it on the fourth round ones to reduce the units? You kind of have to do a little bit of a numbers game, and that's part of what we'll do as we get into the housing element and fair share plan process. Yes, Ms. Pasternak.
Yeah, Graham, are you aware, do we have an inventory of our current market rate units that could potentially be converted? Did that ever get done? I know there was a request to have it done, but to look to see what our capacity within the township is currently for units.
As far as number of existing market rate units?
I'm saying units that are in our township that, based on the rents and so forth, could be considered for conversion to affordable if approached, by the township to the property owners. There was some requests for that over years now. I just never saw it. I never saw it, shared with the public or anything like that.
It's a good question. And it's certainly something I think that this group should, leverage that information as we move into the housing element and fair share plan process, maybe an opportunity for, a willing property owner to engage in a conversation.
Okay.
I see a question regarding double dipping of credits. So credits, you can only apply one credit type per unit. So whatever the maximum credit type would be, that's what you would put towards it. So if you do a special needs housing unit and it's also a 3-bedroom unit, you would take the 1 credit, not the half credit. So you can't double count credits on a unit. That was the end of the presentation. I do have I have an interactive map that I prepared that I would like to just wanted to share with everybody. This shows the obligations for every town across the state. If people are interested, I can drop a link to the map, or you can circulate it around. But I can click and open this, and I'll show everybody kind of how it works a little bit, just if folks were interested. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so this is shortly after DCA adopted or not adopted, but released their report. I went through and as a GIS person, mapping person, I mapped all of the municipal obligations for every municipality across the state. And you can see the yellow lines mark the regional boundaries for each of the subregions. So we have Region 1, here's Region 2, within which where Millburn is located. And the municipalities colored in the orange color are those that are exempt urban aid municipalities. So you can see which of those within our region are those exempt urban aid communities: Montclair, Bloomfield, Nutley, Belleville, Newark, Irvington, East Orange, and Orange in Essex County. Hillside, Elizabeth, Roselle, Rahway, and Plainfield in Union County are the Region 2 exempt qualified urban aid municipalities. And if you click on any town, a little box down here will appear, and it'll tell you kind of some of the basic counts and some information, but it'll give you the prospective need obligation. And it's important to note that the prospective need obligation is subject to either 1,000 unit cap, so you can either have a maximum of 1,000 units or 20% of the existing households within the community. But I'll share this link around in case anybody wants to take a look at what's happening in other communities across the state.
That'd be great.
Okay. Yes, Jean.
Grim, you just said 20% of existing households. Is that just applicable to this round or the total cumulative?
So no, that is just applicable to this round. Each round is a unique time period, if you will, within which each town has to satisfy the obligation within that period.
Is there any way we can know for Millburn, though, what the cumulative percent is?
I mean, I guess we'd have to go back and look at what the prior obligations were. I mean, that's a good
Like,
question.
are we being asked to not double the size, but what percent of where we started, or have we been asked to add?
Yeah, I don't know the number off the top of your head, but I understand conceptually what you're asking. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Good question. I have more questions. Sorry. Millburn, what is a market rate rent and what is an affordable market rate rent? Those are set forth. The question is related to what the rent structures are. Those are set forth by the Affordable Housing Professionals of New Jersey network. It used to be set forth by COA, but obviously that entity doesn't exist anymore. And then there are market thresholds. I'll grab a link to that so you can have the table that shows the income. It's a sliding scale of income and then by number of persons within the household. So obviously larger households have a different income scale. So what town has the highest obligation in our region? I believe it's either, so the colors here on the map it's a gradation that shows the darker greens are the higher number towns. I believe it's either West Orange or Roxbury. Yeah, West Orange was 660 and Roxbury was 989. Yes. And then, oh yeah, here's Linden, which is super high, 787. So yeah, I think it's Roxbury at 989. And when do you anticipate reporting back? Just as far as adjustments to the number, our findings, we are working on it now. I will hopefully have a report back. I would say, either over a holiday break, just before, to advise folks.
Graham, would you say that in terms of Milburn's number that we were, I'm just throwing this out as were we hit hard, sort of fairly, or light with this latest round?
Well, I think that that kind of goes back to my discussion as far as looking at the three individual components that make up the average allocation factor. So if we look at it, the income capacity, Milburn is the highest of all the 91 municipalities in the region. The non-residential valuation factor is 6th of 91 municipalities in the region. And then that land capacity piece is about 42 of 91. So I think that on the whole, obviously Milburn bore a higher share, given how high those two of the three allocation factors came out in the process. And it's really just a numbers exercise at this point.
Yep. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. That's all I had for this evening. I hope this kind of helped provide at least some insight for folks.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Hey,
Mr. Bradford.
Yeah, Graham, I had one last question.
Sure.
Looking at the three factors, there doesn't seem to be much you can do about the income factor, the non-residential valuation, and the only place that's got any give feels like the land capacity.
Yeah, I think that's a correct characterization. Yes. I will caveat that though and say that the income capacity factor is informed by the American Community Survey data prepared by the U.S. Census Bureau, and the date of that data used by DCA for their calculation is the 2018 to 2022 data set, the 5-year data set. I can tell you that the 2019 to 2023 data set, the newer version of that, was just released last Thursday. So we are also looking at that new data to see if that has any impact on communities as well.
Graham, I have one more. When
Sure.
you professionals get together, do you raise the topic that many people have raised about the regional impact of all this development and how that is being looked at by anybody? Is it?
I mean, conceptually it is an issue, and I think that, as a planner, and somebody, we like plans in place. I think that the timing of the state development plan is very curious in this process, in that, the state development plan is to really, guide us regionally and statewide, as we move forward, and having that plan kind of come out after this process has already kind of started feels a little disjointed. But I do think that, it is a big topic of discussion and consideration that municipalities kind of need to be aware of, and start to raise concerns. That infrastructure and capacity needs to be something that's thought about as we move into this. Yeah, I see the question. It's expected that Milburn will need to build more than 2,000 units. I think, obviously, yes, there's, concern about the amount of development that will need to be planned to accommodate or satisfy, the obligations. I think what's important to note is that while the 555 number is the initial number, we will go through a vacant land adjustment process to identify what is actually realistically buildable within the township. So that number probably will be different than what we're looking at today. So, that does not change the concern certainly around increased population or, other infrastructure impacts. But I do just want to kind of temper the scale of, we don't necessarily know exactly what that number will be until we complete the vacant land adjustment process for the municipality, which will further scale down the number. The 1,000 unit cap still does apply in this round, yes, but 1,000 unit cap is on the prospective need obligation calculation. And at 555, obviously the township does not hit the 1,000 unit cap.
All right, so I'm mindful of the time right now. We're just slightly past 8:30. So we'll take maybe one or two more questions, and then we'll wrap up. We are going to be having more of these meetings. We are going to be having more public meetings as well, and we'll put out a schedule in January.
The vacant land adjustment process. So, excuse me, the vacant land adjustment process is a process where we will go through and identify sites that may be available for programming or development opportunity, or where we can identify realistic development opportunities to accommodate some of the fourth round prospective need obligation. Is an exercise that we'll look at, and the new law also requires us to look at redevelopment opportunities too, as far as to accommodate a small portion of the adjusted value. So it is a much more forensic process in going through specific properties, looking at where there may be properties that can accommodate development. It is not the same as the land capacity factor. I want to just caveat that, because the land capacity factor looks solely at those, as I mentioned, the first screened forested or grassland areas, more native landscapes. The vacant land adjustment process is to look at potentially underdeveloped or open properties that may be available for effectuating or accommodating some of the affordable housing development or housing development. So I think that's the characterization for the vacant land adjustment process. And essentially what we do is we say, well, we have 555 units that we're required to plan for, but really we only have land that can accommodate this amount. So we'll satisfy this amount, and then the rest of it can just be through overlays or other mechanisms, more passive mechanisms, rather than more active approaches to accommodate the need. Get credit for 100 years.
And Graham, a quick
Yes.
question on that. What we in the township will be doing, township at the end of the day, will be identifying areas that can meet the need and then put the appropriate zoning in place.
That's
Um,
that's part of the
Rather than
compliance process.
actually doing any building. They're
That's right.
saying, this is someplace you could do, if you were to do it, here's where you do it.
That's right. And making this a planning process. Exactly. Get credit for 100 units by building 50 that are 100% affordable. Yeah, I mean, as far as the crediting goes, yeah, I mean, if you can, leverage credits, but again, you have to be mindful of the 25% cap on the number of credits. But yeah, I mean, as far as the math goes, that's essentially correct. Senior workforce housing, yeah, I think that those are important considerations for us to think about with respect to moving forward into the next period. Yeah, and to Ms. Steinberg's point, yeah, obviously, given that the vacant land number, is 0.46, there really isn't a lot of room to pull the average allocation factor down. But I think that what's important is for the calculated prospective need obligation to be accurate for the township. I think that that's really what's important in this process.
All right, well, seeing that there's no more questions, it is starting to get late. I'd like to thank you, Graham, for coming and doing this presentation. And I really would like to thank everyone in the audience that came to listen and learn. And we are certainly going to have more opportunities to, participate in this process in the coming year. So we will keep you posted.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Graham.
Thank you.
Thank you, Graham.